Yes, Colonel Hickson.
As your wife and I were speaking about two things, at the same time the Second Vatican Council was being implemented, and also we were thinking about what happened when the beautiful inner city churches were abandoned with this process you were talking about, and then the new ones looked like spaceships and everything were created, church architecture in the suburbs, in the subtle ways that it's hard to measure, but that affected the faith of Catholics too, as well as the ecumenism, if not syncretism, as interpreted by some of the things implemented by the Second Vatican Council. But just a brief comment. But could you say a little bit more about your concept of the psychological warfare establishment, where you got this and what it really includes, as you understand? It's a very striking formulation. The psychological warfare establishment.
I would recommend Simpson's book, The Science of Coercion. He basically says that at around 1938, the Rockefeller family and the foundations they controlled felt that war in Europe was inevitable. They were also interested in promoting Americans, getting America involved in that war. We now know that they were involved with the promoting of Robert Stevenson, or Intrepid, the British agent who came over here to destroy America first and to bring America into the war. But basically what happened is that there were seminars put on at the University of Chicago, which brought together the old team that was associated with CPI, the Committee for Public Information under Frank Creel, during World War I, the World War I propaganda ministry. And at that point, what they tried to do was implement all of the newest discoveries of behaviorism and the social sciences into the panoply of psychological warfare. And so that's basically what I'm talking about. John B. Watson was supposed to play a crucial role in this, but by then John B. Watson was pretty much drinking himself to death on his farm in Connecticut and was out of the hors de combat. And so they found a new champion in Alfred Kinsey. I don't have the quote with me, but the speech I gave at Catholic U quoted Alan Gregg, the head of the Rockefeller Medical Division. When Wardell Pomeroy, Kinsey's assistant, was drafted, Kinsey panicked, wrote to Alan Gregg, who then wrote a letter to the draft board in which he said that this man's work is crucial for the control, that's his word, of civilian and military population. In other words, the whole Kinsey sex studies were seen as a form of control that would be used for both civilian and military populations. That's why the Rockefellers were spending their money. So it was a convergence of all of these things that led to the resurrection of psychological warfare. Yeah.
I have a follow-on question. Would you, I know you can't develop it very much here, but the Deweyite apparatus that was in place when the Frankfurt School came with their own interest in fascist or authoritarian personalities, would you say that that fed into what you were talking about too with Worth? And this is a footnote. At the time, Colonel Wild Bill Donovan, who was a Roman Catholic, as you know, has a short thing that he wrote before he was made a brigadier general and head of OSS about the fifth column in the United States. And he wasn't talking about the Soviet apparatus or anything. This was before the war. And he was talking about the German fifth column in the United States that had to be dealt with even before Stevenson through Canada got to him. But the question had to do with the coming of the Frankfurt School types housed at Columbia and the John Dewey apparatus that had prepared the way for them.
Dewey is at the very beginning of this book. Albert Barnes was a kind of self-made millionaire from Kensington in Philadelphia who did a solve called Argosolve that would prevent congenital syphilis. And he made millions, and he became a big investor in art. He has the Barnes Foundation has the greatest collection of Impressionist art in the world. A kind of very eccentric character. He was never accepted by the establishment in Philadelphia. But he was a devotee of John Dewey. He would have himself driven up to New York City every week to attend Dewey's seminars. And Dewey, in his seminar, were two young no, they were still Protestant ministers at this point, but Paul Blanchard and Brand Blanchard. And it was the time of World War I, and they were concerned about foreign nationals in the country as a fifth column. They were particularly concerned about the Poles. And so Barnes came up with money to provide something like research or a settlement house for Brand and Paul Blanchard to live in Bridesburg and see if they could Americanize the Poles. And they spent the summer of 1918 there, and eventually Brand Blanchard went on to write his doctoral dissertation at Harvard about the experience, and he said, no, you can't. It's impossible. They're hopeless. They are priest-ridden. They speak a foreign language. The priests tell them how to vote. They are an incredibly, they were just too tough a nut to crack. So the interesting thing in doing this research is, okay, that's 1918. Okay, Dewey then went on to write a glowing endorsement of Paul Blanchard's book in 1949 when it comes out. 1948, the urban renewal map for Philadelphia shows up. Okay, the housing establishment, which is always a WASP organization, the Philadelphia Housing Association, comes up with its map for the renewal of Philadelphia. Well, it's all the usual neighborhoods. They're going to destroy every single neighborhood from South Philadelphia all the way up to Temple University, up in that north-south axis. And so you could say, well, that's the oldest housing in Philadelphia. Maybe that's the reason. And then you look off, and then way off over here, there's a whole neighborhood that's going to be destroyed. Well, that's Bridesburg. That was the Polish neighborhood. Now, it's not contiguous to this neighborhood. It's way off into the northeast. In terms of blight, I mean, I was there in 1995. The houses aren't blighted in 1995. That means a fortiori, they are not going to be blighted in 1948. Okay? It was the same housing stock. You can see it's the same houses. Now, why was that? Well, you look down of the list of the Quaker Housing Committee, guess who's on the list? Paul Blanchard. I think it just said Paul Blanchard. So when I'm there, I'm thinking, Paul Blanchard's he's coming back to wreck the neighborhood that he couldn't deal with in 1918, but it turns out it was his son. I was at the American Friends Service Committee, I kept asking around, nobody knew who Paul Blanchard was. But it turns out that it was his son, and his son became a Quaker.